She slapped me at the Christmas dinner table. My father watched, but then my grandfather stood up. He just stared at my dad, and the whole room froze. They didn't know he had just armed a time bomb, hidden in the very house that saw the assault. It would take a courtroom, a secret will, and a missing lawyer to finally make it explode. My name is Phoebe Collins. I am 34 years old. The marble floor of the Denver Central Courthouse was cold, impossibly cold. Even through the thick soles of my leather shoes, it was the kind of cold that seeped into you, a damp, institutional chill that had nothing to do with the December weather outside. The air smelled of old paper, industrial floor wax, and the faint, metallic tang of human anxiety. Each step I took, the sharp click of my heels against the terrazzo tile, echoed up into the vaulted, shadowed ceiling. It was not just a sound, it was a gavel. It was a hammer striking, again and again, nailing the past shut, or perhaps, finally, prying it open. My briefcase felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained not just legal documents, but the entire weight of the last 6 years. They were waiting for me past the security checkpoint, a chaotic, hungry mass of electronics and desperate faces. The moment they saw me, the hallway exploded. "Phoebe! Phoebe! Why now? After all these years? Is it true you were disinherited? Is that why you're suing?" A comment for Channel 4. The camera flashes were blinding, automatic, turning the dim August hallway into a frantic, strobe-lit interrogation, microphones shoved forward, brushing the lapel of my coat. I kept my eyes fixed on a point straight ahead, a blur of dark wood that represented the courtroom doors. "Luke, Mr. Caldwell, did you forge your father's will?" "Victoria, did you pressure your husband?" They swarmed him as he and Victoria arrived from a side entrance, flanked by their own expensive legal team. I saw a local news feed on a monitor hanging above the entryway, the red ticker tape already running its synthesized judgment. Daughter sues father and stepmother over grandfather's estate fraud. They made it sound so clinical. Fraud. It was not fraud. It was theft. It was erasure. It was the culmination of a lifetime of being told I did not matter. I ignored the press, pushing through the last of them, my shoulder brushing against a cameraman who cursed under his breath. I reached the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B and pushed them open. Inside, the chaos of the hallway died, replaced by a thick, pressurized silence. They were already seated. My father, Luke Caldwell, founder and president of the Caldwell Meridian Group, sat at the defendant's table. His empire was built on mid-range housing complexes, praised by local magazines as the new face of affordable Denver. But I knew where the money really came from, and I knew how little of it trickled down. His hair, once dark and commanding, was thinner now, silvered completely at the temples, and it looked like he had lost weight. His expensive suit hung slightly loose from his shoulders. He looked up as I entered, and I saw it. The same expression he wore my entire childhood. Every time I failed to live up to the invisible, shifting standard he held. Not anger, not malice, just that familiar, bone-deep, weary disappointment, as if I had, once again, tracked mud onto his clean floor. And beside him, Victoria, my stepmother, the woman who struck me at the Christmas dinner table. Today, she was immaculate, a fortress of quiet wealth. A double string of heavy, white pearls rested on the collar of her navy blue dress. Her posture was perfect, spine rigid, hands clasped loosely in her lap, her expensive rings catching the fluorescent light. She looked at me as I crossed the bar. Not with hatred, not even with anger. It was a look of detached assessment, the way one might examine a crack in the ceiling, calculating the cost of the repair. Her gaze was as cold and hard as the ice that had clinked in her glass that night. She was not afraid. She was annoyed. I walked past them. I did not look back. The gallery was full. The financial elite of Denver, the bankers, the developers, the old money families whose names adorned libraries and hospital wings, were packed into the dark wooden benches. I had seen these men and women at my father's parties, sipping his champagne, laughing at Victoria's curated anecdotes. Their whispers were a low hum, like disturbed insects in a jar. That's her. That's the daughter. I heard she was always unstable, so sensitive. It's a shame, dragging the family name through this right before the holidays. Luke would never do that, but Victoria, she always gets what she wants. I recognized a few faces. They recognized me, too. They remembered the awkward girl in the wrong dress, hovering near the bookcases at the Caldwell Christmas parties, but they also knew who I was now. Phoebe Collins, attorney at law. Not at a high-powered firm, not at the family company. I was senior counsel at the Rocky Ridge Legal Aid Center. I spent my days, and most of my nights, defending people who were being crushed by men exactly like my father. I fought evictions, predatory loans, and wage theft. The irony of my presence here, as a plaintiff demanding millions, was not lost on them. I could see the smirks. They thought this was hypocrisy. They thought this was a cash grab from a disgruntled child. They had no idea what it was really about. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. The wood was scarred with the initials and board carvings of 1,000 other desperate cases. Naomi Briggs, the assistant United States attorney who had finally taken the case, sat beside me. She was sharp, focused, and wore a suit that was functional, not fashionable. I had brought the case to her months ago. Not as a simple civil suit over a will, but as a criminal complaint. I had laid out the evidence of conspiracy, wire fraud, and witness tampering. Naomi had looked at the file for 10 minutes, her face impassive. Then she looked at me and said, "They didn't just steal your inheritance, Ms. Collins. They committed federal crimes to do it." She saw the pattern. She was not intimidated by the Caldwell name. She leaned in, her voice low, meant only for me. "Are you ready?" I looked down at my hands, resting flat on the polished, worn table. They were perfectly still. No tremor. It surprised me. My mind flashed back, an involuntary, brutal reflex, to that night, the oppressive heat of the dining room, the smell of pine and roasting meat, the glow of the candlelight on 20 smiling, oblivious faces, the sting of Victoria's hand against my cheek, the way my skin burned hot and then ice cold. I remembered the sound, a sharp, wet crack that silenced the clinking of silverware and the festive, piped-in music. I remembered the spilled wine, a splash of dark red across the white linen cloth. Like blood, I remembered my own hands, hidden in my lap, shaking so badly I could not pick up the napkin I had dropped. I remembered my grandfather, Walter Caldwell, sitting at the head of the table. He had watched the whole thing, his eyes, old but bright, missing nothing. He had looked at my father, who sat frozen, staring at his empty plate, his face pale. He looked at Victoria, who was breathing hard, her face flushed with triumph, daring anyone to challenge her. And then, slowly, deliberately, Walter had placed his knife and fork on his plate. He had pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly against the floor. He stood up. He did not yell. He did not comfort me. He simply stood, a tall, aging patriarch, and his silence was louder and more terrifying than her violence. That was the moment everything changed. I snapped back to the present. I turned my head and met Naomi's gaze. "I am ready." That night, nobody spoke for me, not my father, who chose his wife over his daughter, not the guests, who looked away, suddenly fascinated by their dessert plates, not even, in that specific moment, my grandfather. Today, I would speak for myself, and I would speak for him. "All rise." The marshal, a man with a weary face, called the room to order. The federal judge, a severe woman with gray hair pulled back into a ruthlessly tight bun, entered and took the bench. She rustled her robes, sat, and adjusted her microphone. The feedback squealed for a second, making everyone wince. She looked down at the papers in front of her. "We are here for the case, number 22-375, Caldwell versus Caldwell. Hearing the name spoken aloud in this place felt wrong. It was a violation. It was a name that meant power, real estate, Denver society, generations of history. Here, it was just a legal filing. Bitter, choked, it tasted like ash in my mouth. A family, bisected and defined by the word versus. Naomi Briggs stood up, a picture of professional calm. She buttoned her gray suit jacket, picked up her notes, and walked to the lectern. She began her opening statement, her voice clear and carrying easily through the quiet room. Your Honor, this is a case about greed. It is a case about the systematic manipulation of an old man's legacy. But more than that, it is a case about the abuse of power. It is about how a family, blinded by entitlement, conspired to commit fraud, to forge documents, and to threaten a man into silence, all to steal what was rightfully promised to another. Her voice began to fade, though I kept my eyes fixed forward, projecting a calm I did not entirely feel. My mind was slipping. Pulled by an undertow I could no longer fight. It was sliding away from the sterile courtroom, away from the legal arguments and the jury selection, and pulling me back to the source of it all. It did not start with the will. It did not start with the lawyers, or the missing money, or the forged signatures. It started in a room filled with golden light, the smell of roasted pine and rich gravy, a room full of powerful people who said nothing. It started with the deep, profound humiliation of a hand striking flesh. I lifted my gaze from the jury box to the wall above the judge's head. A large, ornate clock was mounted there, a relic from an older, grander courthouse. Its dark, polished wood frame was intricately carved, not with eagles or scales of justice, but with holly leaves and pine cones, designed to look like a permanent Christmas wreath. The brass pendulum swung back and forth, ticking loudly in the silence. Past, present, past. The clock was mocking me, a festive decoration in a place of cold judgment. The circle was finally, agonizingly, closing. The Caldwell name means something in Denver. It is pressed into the concrete sidewalks of 36 apartment complexes and etched onto the glass doors of a dozen mid-rise buildings. Caldwell Meridian Group. My grandfather, Walter Caldwell, built it from nothing. He came to Colorado with $50 and a toolbox after the war. He bought one duplex, then two, then a small building, then a larger one. He had a rule, one he repeated to me my entire life. Property isn't just profit, Phoebe, it's a responsibility. He believed that. He built decent places for working families, places that were clean and safe, and he charged a fair rent. The local magazines loved him for it. They ran profiles calling him the model of mountain mercy, the man who built an empire of affordable housing. It sounded noble. It was noble, when he was the one in charge. My grandmother died when I was 9. My father, Luke, did not grieve long. Within 18 months, he married Victoria. She burst into our quiet, old money house in Redwood Heights, like a flash flood of expensive perfume and sharp, bright laughter. She came from the world of public relations and high-stakes event planning. She did not just enter a room. She assessed it, managed it, and conquered it. In public, she was perfect. She charmed the bankers, remembered the names of politicians' wives, and her smile was a brilliant, warm thing that made people feel seen. At home, behind the heavy, closed doors, her voice dropped. Her words became precise, sharp instruments. She was a surgeon of social status, and from the moment she arrived, I was the unhealthy tissue she was determined to excise. It was never overt. Not at first. It was subtle. A masterpiece of quiet sabotage refined over years. I was not defiant. I was emotionally fragile. I was not quiet. I was sullen and ungrateful. If I spoke up to correct a fact, I was desperate for attention. If I was silent, I was judging everyone. She was brilliant at it. I would watch her pull an aunt aside at a family gathering, her face a mask of loving concern. "I'm so worried about Phoebe," she would sigh, just loud enough for others to catch the drift. "She just struggles. She misses her mother terribly. Of course, the poor thing. She just doesn't know how to behave. It's so hard on Luke. I became the resident tragedy, the difficult, sensitive child. My father was never there to see the truth. Luke Caldwell was perpetually busy. He was the group in Caldwell Meridian Group. He was in board meetings, on construction sites, flying to Singapore for investor dinners. He came home late, smelling of expensive cigars and the crisp night air, long after I was supposed to be in bed. When he was home, he wanted peace. He wanted the flawless, calm domestic life that Victoria curated for him. He got his news from one source: her version of my day, her version of my attitude, her version of my latest episode became his reality. His perception of me was filtered through her lens, and I came out warped, distorted, a problem to be managed rather than a daughter to be known. Victoria brought her own child into the marriage. Elliot was 3 years older than me, and from the moment he walked in, he was anointed. He was the heir. He was loud, charming in a shallow, predatory way, and utterly, profoundly lazy. While I spent my time trying to understand the business I loved, Elliot spent his time spending its profits. His life was a blur of new sports cars, ski trips to Gstaad, and parties that ended with someone quietly cleaning up broken glass. Victoria called it networking. My father, desperate for the kind of son he understood, called it finding himself. Elliot was the future of the company, even though he could not read a profit and loss statement if his life depended on it. I refused to be the sensitive ghost. I would not be defined by her narrative. I went to Wharton. I studied economics and finance. I graduated top 5% of my class. I came back to Denver and asked for a job. I thought I could prove my worth with numbers, a language my father had to respect. They put me in the basement, literally, in the financial analysis department. I spent 2 years building models, tracking cash flow, and finding inefficiencies. I drafted a proposal for retrofitting 3 of our oldest buildings, a plan that would increase energy efficiency by 30% and save the company millions over the next decade, all while keeping rent stable. It was a perfect execution of my grandfather's philosophy. I presented it to my department head. 2 weeks later, I saw the executive summary going to the board. It had a new cover page. The Elliot Caldwell Initiative. My work, my numbers, my analysis, his name. When I tried to object, marching into my father's office with my original files, Victoria was suddenly there. She put a calming hand on my father's shoulder, looked at me with that sad, concerned face and said, "Phoebe, darling, we all know you helped, but Elliot is the face of these projects. You can't undermine his confidence like this. We're a family. We're supposed to be a team." My father looked at me, his face etched with that familiar disappointment. "Be a team player, Phoebe. Your brother needs the support." Elliot was not my brother. The only one who saw was Walter, my grandfather. He had officially retired, but he kept an office on the top floor, the one with the view of the mountains. He would call me up, bypassing my managers, his voice a gravelly rumble over the intercom. "Phoebe, get up here. Bring the projections for the Aurora complex, the real ones, not the glossy garbage Elliot's people cooked up." I would sit in his vast, leather and mahogany office, the smell of old books and pipe tobacco clinging to the air. He would spread the balance sheets across his massive, worn desk. "Here," he'd say, tapping a line item with a thick, blunt finger. "This is where they're hiding the debt. They think they're smart. They're just sloppy." He taught me the business, the real business, the bones of it. He looked at me one afternoon, the winter light cutting across his desk, and said, "You are smarter than all of them. Phoebe, you have my mind. You have your grandmother's spine. Don't you ever let them define you." Christmas was Victoria's masterpiece. It was the physical manifestation of her narrative. The Redwood Heights mansion was professionally decorated by mid-November, every surface dripping with tasteful, expensive, impersonal cheer. And the walls were her storybook. The grand staircase was a gallery dedicated to Elliot. Elliot cutting a ribbon at a new building, Elliot accepting a Young Leader in Business award from the Chamber of Commerce, an award I knew Victoria's PR firm had essentially bought, Elliot shaking hands with the governor, Elliot on a polo pony. My picture was nowhere. I had been erased from the visual history of my own home. The Christmas Eve dinner was the main event. Dozens of guests, bankers, politicians, society figures, 1 year, when I was 22, just home from college. I wore a simple black dress I had bought myself with money from an internship. Victoria stopped me in the foyer, right in front of 2 city council members. She looked me up and down, a look of profound pity on her face. "Oh, darling," she sighed, loud enough for them to hear. "That dress, it's just so simple. You look like the help." She then turned, picked up a silver tray of champagne flutes from a passing waiter, and handed it to me. "Since you're dressed for it, be a dear and pass these around. Make yourself useful." My face burned. The councilman looked away, suddenly fascinated by a painting on the wall, embarrassed for me, but they said nothing. I did it. I passed the champagne. I felt the smiles and the pitying looks of the guests. But there was always one small rebellion, one saving grace. My grandfather, Walter. He would be sitting at the head of the long, formal dining table, already deep in conversation, and the chair to his immediate right, a place of honor, was always empty. He would save it. He would wait until I had finished being useful, until I had been thoroughly humiliated. And when I finally crept into the dining room, long after everyone else was seated, he would look up. He would pat the empty chair. "Phoebe, here, sit by me." He would do it right in front of Victoria. Her smile would tighten, a barely perceptible tick in her jaw. That empty chair, waiting for me, was his silent defiance. It was a declaration of my worth, and it was. I see now, the one thing Victoria could never forgive him for, it was the source of a tension that grew tighter, more brittle, every single Christmas. After one of those tense dinners, maybe 3 years before the slap, he had called me into his study. He seemed tired, older than I had ever seen him. He was looking at a photograph of my grandmother. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "You're like her. You don't bend." He turned to me, his eyes intense. "This house, this company, it's gotten away from me. It's become about surfaces, not foundations. It's all hollow." He looked at me, and his gaze was so direct it felt like a physical weight. "I'm telling you this so you'll remember it. When I am gone, you will still have a place in this house. This company will know you. I guarantee it." It was a strange, vague promise. I did not understand it then. I thought it was the emotional rambling of an old man who saw his legacy being squandered by his son and his grasping wife. I did not know it was a legal statement. I did not know that promise, spoken in the quiet of his study, would one day be dissected by lawyers, that it would become the most important piece of evidence in a federal courtroom. I just held on to it, a small, cold comfort, not realizing he had just handed me the key to the entire empire. It was the Christmas I turned 28. The snow was heavier than it had been in a decade, falling in thick, silent curtains, burying Denver and turning the hills of Redwood Heights into a soft, white abstraction. The mansion was Victoria's triumph, a fortress of festive light against the dark woods, a 20-foot fir, dripping with imported crystal ornaments and thousands of white lights, dominated the great room. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, mulled wine, and the spicy perfume Victoria always wore. I was exhausted, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. I had just spent the last 12 months working myself to the bone, nights and weekends, pulling one of our flagship apartment projects back from the brink of total collapse. The original projections, the ones Elliot had supposedly overseen, were a fantasy. The project was leveraged to its hilt, bleeding money, and threatening to default on a $30 million loan. I had found the rot, restructured the financing, renegotiated with the contractors, and saved it. It was my win. It was undeniable. I had worked myself sick for it, and I was holding on to the naive hope that tonight, in front of the bankers and the city council members, my father would finally acknowledge it. Victoria was at her most dazzling, gliding through the crowd in a dress the color of expensive champagne. She was holding court, her voice carrying, clear and bright. "Elliot is just so thrilled with the Gateway project," she was saying to a prominent local banker. "He really turned that one around. He's a natural. He is the future of Caldwell Meridian. We are so proud." I felt the familiar cold drop in my stomach. We moved into the dining room. The long mahogany table was set for 30, gleaming with silver and crystal, a masterpiece of festive opulence. I found my place card, predictably seated far down the table, between a junior bank VP and a distant cousin. My grandfather, Walter, was at his traditional place at the head of the table. He nodded at me as I sat, but Victoria, at the other end, was already tapping her glass for a toast. The dinner conversation was a hum of money, politics, and real estate. And then it happened. The banker Victoria had been charming earlier, a man named Henderson, looked down the table. "Well, I have to say, the real feather in your cap this year is that low-income housing refit in 5 points," he said, his voice booming slightly. "Saw the numbers. A brilliant piece of work. Truly. Whoever ran that deserves a medal." Silence fell for a beat. I felt my heart quicken. This was it. Victoria smiled, a bright, magnanimous flash of white teeth. "We are so proud of Elliot," she said, raising her glass toward him. "He truly put his heart into that one." I saw Elliot, sitting near her, smirk and lift his own glass, accepting the praise. He had not set foot on that property a single time. Something inside me, worn thin by years of this, finally snapped. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I simply said, clear enough for those around me to hear, "Actually, Mr. Henderson, Elliot was focused on the Gateway project. I was the lead on the 5 points refit. I ran the data and the restructuring." I said it politely. It was a simple correction of fact. The entire table went quiet. Mr. Henderson looked confused, his eyes darting between me and Victoria. Victoria's smile did not falter, but her eyes went flat and hard, like polished stones. She turned her entire body to face me, though she was 20 feet away. "Phoebe, darling," she said, her voice dripping with pity, "you must not misunderstand. We all know you. Helped. You did your part, but you must learn not to always make everything about you. It's so unbecoming." The condescension was suffocating. I felt the heat rise in my face. "It's not about me," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted. "It's just the truth." "The truth," Elliot chimed in, leaning back in his chair with a bored, cruel smile, "is that you're just stressed. Phoebe, it's okay. We get it." He gestured around the room. "This is how adults celebrate. You should try it instead of living in that tiny, sad apartment downtown, counting beans. Maybe if you got out more, found a date, you wouldn't be so—" He wiggled his fingers. "Uptight." The casual public dismissal of my life, my work, my home, my value, hit me like a shove. I was the spinster, the failure, the bean counter. He was the heir. Before I could respond, a waiter, an older man with a kind, stressed face, was leaning over to serve the guest beside me. He stumbled slightly, perhaps on the leg of the chair, and a small spoonful of dark cranberry sauce sloshed from his serving dish. It landed on the white tablecloth, a few dark red spatters landing near my side plate. A tiny, insignificant accident. Victoria saw it, and she had her weapon. "My God!" Her voice was a shriek, slicing through the room. She was instantly on her feet, but she was not looking at the waiter. She was staring at me. "Are you that clumsy? Are you that unaware of your surroundings?" she yelled. "Victoria," my father started, his voice a low warning. "No, Luke, I am sick of it. This is a $5,000 tablecloth. She just sits there, doesn't even move, doesn't know how to conduct herself. She doesn't even try to get out of the way." She was advancing, walking down the length of the table, her face contorted. The guests were frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice a whisper. "The waiter tripped." "The waiter tripped because you are always in the way. You are a black hole in this family. Phoebe, always sullen, always needy, always making everyone else uncomfortable. You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" She was standing over me now, looming, her perfume choking me. "I don't know why we even bother," she spat, her voice lower now, more venomous, for me and the few people nearby. "You're just like her, just like your mother, weak, overly emotional, and completely incapable of handling the world she was born into. She couldn't take it, and you can't either." That was it. The air left my lungs. The mention of my mother, who had died of an illness Victoria loved to reinterpret as a failure of character, was a line she had never crossed so publicly. I stood up, my chair scraped back, a harsh, ugly sound. "Don't you ever," I said, my voice shaking but clear, "talk about my mother." For the first time in my life, I had not backed down. I had not looked away. I had met her rage with my own. She looked genuinely shocked. Her face flushed a dark, blotchy red. She had expected me to shrink, to cry, to apologize. I had challenged her in front of her audience. She had lost control of the narrative. So she used the one thing she had left. She shoved my shoulder, hard, knocking me off balance, and then, with her open right hand, she slapped me across the face. The sound was a sickening crack. It was not a tap. It was a full-bodied, violent strike. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying. My cheek instantly exploded in a white-hot, stinging pain. A nearby wine glass, jostled by the impact, toppled over, shattering on the hardwood floor, spilling red wine across the polished wood. Dead silence. There was no music, no one was breathing. There was only the sound of wine dripping onto the floor. Tick, tick, tick. I tasted blood, a sharp, metallic tang where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. I slowly, very slowly, turned my head back to look at her. And I saw my father, Luke Caldwell. He was standing. His chair was pushed back, his face as pale as the tablecloth. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a kind of horror. He looked at his wife, who was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her hands still raised slightly. He had stood up. I waited. My cheek was on fire. My eyes were watering from the impact, but I would not let the tears fall. My father opened his mouth. He looked at the shocked faces of his guests, the bankers, the politicians. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at me, at the red mark already blooming on my skin. And then he sat back down. He picked up his napkin, his hands trembling. He looked down at his plate, at the cooling duck, at the mess. "Victoria," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Let's not make a scene. It was her fault. She shouldn't have provoked you." The betrayal was more painful than the slap. The floor dropped out from under me. He had seen it, and he had chosen her. He had blamed me. At the head of the table, my grandfather, Walter, had not moved. He watched my father sit down. He watched me absorb the final, definitive abandonment. Then, slowly, deliberately, Walter placed his heavy silver knife and fork parallel on his plate. The click was unnaturally loud in the silence. He looked at my father, his son. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of cold, profound, and final disappointment. It was a look of judgment, a look that stripped Luke Caldwell bare in front of everyone. The air in the room, already thin, became glacial. Walter pushed his chair back. He stood up. He was an old man, but he was still tall, and in that moment, he dominated the room. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at me. He looked at my father. He picked up his wine glass, the full one, and tapped it lightly with a fingernail. The clear, ringing sound cut through the tension. "The party is over," he announced, his voice a low rumble, not a shout, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He let the silence hang for another second. Then he said the words that would echo for years, the words that would be read into a court record. Tonight, my son has shown me exactly who is truly worthy of the Caldwell name. He turned. Victoria was white, her mouth open, finally understanding she had gone too far. Not with me, but with him. He walked past her. As he passed my chair, he did not stop to comfort me. He did not make a scene. He simply placed his large, warm, dry hand on my shoulder. Just for a second. A brief, firm pressure. It was enough. Victoria saw it. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. But for the first time in her life, she said nothing. No one did. They just watched him walk out of the room. The party dissolved in a chaos of hushed whispers, averted eyes, and the sounds of coats being retrieved. I stayed in the dining room until everyone was gone, my cheek throbbing, the shame and the rage churning in my stomach like acid. A different waiter, a young woman, quietly came and cleaned up the broken glass. Later, long after my father and Victoria had locked themselves in their bedroom, the house intercom buzzed. It was Walter. "Phoebe, my study, now." I went upstairs. He was not looking at the view. He was sitting at his desk, in front of a stack of papers. "Sit down," he said. I sat. He did not mention the slap. He did not ask if I was all right. He just looked at me with those tired, sharp eyes. "There is paperwork," he said, tapping the stack. "That needs adjusting. Things I have put off for too long. What happened tonight has clarified my thinking." He leaned forward. "I am going to see my lawyer, Robert Klein, after the holiday. I am making changes." He paused, and his expression softened for just a moment. "This will be a difficult time, but I want you to promise me something." "Anything," I whispered. "Don't let that slap be the last thing you remember of me. Don't let that be the end of your story in this house. You understand?" I don't know," I admitted. "You will," he said. "Now go, get some ice for that cheek, and don't let them see you cry." I walked out of the mansion into the driving snow. My cheek was a raw, stinging fire, and the cold air felt good against it. My heart was shattered, but beneath the pain, beneath the humiliation, there was something else, a small, hard kernel of something. My grandfather had stood up. I did not know it then. I could not have known. I thought he was just ashamed of his son. I thought he was just making a final symbolic gesture. I had no idea that slap, and his standing up, had just activated a complex, fail-safe plan he had been building for years. I was not just a victim. I was, as of that moment, his chosen weapon. The war had just begun. A few months after that Christmas, things settled into a cold, brittle truce. Walter seemed quieter, more distant. I saw him stumble once, catching himself on the doorframe of his study. He just waved me off, saying he had skipped breakfast, but his face was ashen. I found out later, much later, that it had been a transient ischemic attack, a mini-stroke, a warning shot. He told no one in the family. He only told his lawyer, Robert Klein. That fact alone, that he would trust his attorney with a medical crisis he hid from his son, should have told me everything. He lasted another year, the truce held, fragile as ice, through the spring, the summer, and the fall. Then, just as the first snows of the next winter began to dust the Rockies, his heart, weakened by a lifetime of stress and what I now believe was profound disappointment, finally gave out. Walter Caldwell died of a massive coronary embolism on a Tuesday morning. The funeral was a state event. It felt less like a mourning and more like a corporate merger. The governor was there, half the city council, every banker in the state. The cathedral was standing room only, filled with the scent of lilies and old money. I sat in the second row, behind my father and Victoria. They were the picture of dignified sorrow. Victoria, veiled in expensive black lace, dabbed at her dry eyes, her hand gripping my father's arm. Luke looked shell-shocked, a man finally facing a vacuum he could not fill with meetings or acquisitions. The newspapers ran obituaries praising his empire, his community spirit, his role as a patriarch. The photos they used were of him cutting ribbons, with Luke and Elliot, ever the designated heir, by his side. Victoria was quoted extensively in the Denver Post. He was a titan, but more than that, a beloved father and grandfather. We are simply devastated. I read the words and felt a nausea so profound I had to put the paper down. A week later, I received the stiff, cream-colored envelope. I was summoned to the offices of Robert Klein, the longtime family attorney, for the reading of the will. I walked into that polished, wood-paneled conference room with a knot in my stomach, but beneath the knot, there was that seed of hope Walter had planted that night. When I am gone, you will still have a place in this house. This company will know you. I guarantee it. He had stood up for me. This was the moment his promise, his final act of defiance, would be fulfilled. They were all there. My father, Victoria, and Elliot. They sat on one side of the massive table. I sat on the other, alone. Robert Klein, a man I had known my whole life, a man who used to give me lemon drops when I visited Walter's office as a child, sat at the head. He looked awful. His face was puffy, his eyes were bloodshot, and he would not meet my gaze. He just kept shuffling papers, his hands visibly shaking. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. We are here today to read the last will and testament of Walter Caldwell. He began to read in a monotone. The legalese washed over me. Dispositions of personal effects, charitable donations to the university, the art museum. Then he got to the meat of it. To my beloved son, Luke Caldwell, I leave my primary residence in Redwood Heights, along with all its contents. My father closed his eyes, as if in prayer. Victoria's hand tightened on his. And to my grandson, Elliot Caldwell, I leave the Silver Pines Lake House and the Vale condominium, to be his outright. Elliot, who had been staring at the table, allowed a small, smug smile to play on his lips before he suppressed it. Klein took a labored sip of water, his hand trembling so much it rattled the glass against his teeth. As to the controlling shares of the Caldwell Meridian Group, representing 51% of all voting stock, I bequeath these jointly to my son, Luke Caldwell, and my grandson, Elliot Caldwell, to be managed as a single trust. I stopped breathing. It was not possible. Walter hated Elliot's business sense. He knew Elliot was a liability. He knew he was lazy and dull. This was wrong. Klein kept reading, his voice speeding up, wanting it to be over. And to my granddaughter, Phoebe Collins. I leaned forward. My heart was a cold, hard stone in my chest. Here it was, the guarantee. I leave the sum of $100,000, tax-free, as well as my personal library and my collection of fountain pens, in gratitude for her affection and service to the family. $100,000, pens, and service. He had not said intelligence. He had not said loyalty. He had not said vision. He had said service. It was a tip. It was a severance package. It was what you gave the help. Victoria let out a small, theatrical gasp. She placed her hand on Luke's arm. "Oh, Luke," she whispered, as if shocked. He was so traditional, always wanted the men to run things, I suppose. But I caught her eye across the table. Just for a second. It was not surprise. It was pure, unadulterated triumph. Her victory was so complete, it was almost serene. I was numb. I felt the floor drop away. The same vertigo I had felt when my father sat back down at the Christmas table. This was the second slap. The first was from Victoria's hand. This one was from Walter's. It was a posthumous betrayal. A final declaration that I was, and always had been, nothing. I looked at Klein, who was already gathering his papers, his face slick with sweat. "Is that all?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, alien. "That is the entirety of the executed last will and testament, dated 6 months ago," he said, still not looking at me. He snapped his briefcase shut. I stood up, my chair scraping. I walked out of the conference room. My father caught up to me in the lobby. "Phoebe," he said, his voice gentle. That gentle voice was always a warning. Phoebe, wait. I know this is disappointing, but your grandfather knew what he was doing. He put his hand on my arm. I flinched, pulling it away as if I had been burned. You're so independent, he said, and the words were meant to be a compliment, but they felt like a final dismissal. You've made your own way. You don't need these things. Elliot, he needs this. He needs the responsibility. This is what will finally make him a man. He was framing my exclusion as a vote of confidence. He was framing Elliot's unearned windfall as a character-building exercise. He already has his name on my work. Dad, I said, my voice hollow. Now he has my legacy. Are you done? I walked away from him. I knew it was wrong. Walter had promised me. He had used the word guarantee. He had told me he was seeing Klein to make changes. This was not a change. This was a confirmation of the status quo he despised. I tried to call Klein's office the next day. The secretary said he was unavailable. A week later, he was on extended leave. Within 3 months, the firm had been dissolved. Robert Klein had vanished. The rumor, circulated by Victoria's social circle, was that he'd had a small health scare and moved to a quiet, anonymous life in Florida. He just disappeared. All the files, including my grandfather's, were transferred to a large, impersonal corporate law firm that Victoria's family had used for years. I tried to make inquiries. I was met with a firewall of legal jargon. The estate was sealed. The probate was closed. Everything was in order. I was just the disgruntled granddaughter. The narrative was set in stone. I even received a text message from Victoria, a rare direct communication. It was perfectly polite and utterly menacing. Phoebe, I heard you were making calls. Please stop. Don't dig. Let your grandfather rest in peace. You must respect his wishes. I could not stay at Caldwell Meridian. The atmosphere was unbearable. Elliot was now my superior, strutting around the office, calling meetings to discuss new branding concepts, which involved changing the company logo to something more dynamic. He treated me with a smirking, paternalistic pity that was worse than open hostility. The air in that building was toxic, suffocating. I could not breathe. So I walked out. But not before I did one last thing. The low-income project I had saved, the 5 Points refit, was being mismanaged again. The funds diverted to one of Elliot's new vanity projects. The tenants, the ones I had worked to protect, were facing massive rent hikes because the new efficiency systems were not being maintained. I took the severance check Walter had left me, the $100,000, and I anonymously put it into an escrow account to cover the maintenance contracts for the next 2 years. It was almost every penny I had. It was a stupid, emotional, financially ruinous decision, but it was the only part of my grandfather's real legacy I could save. I left the company with my savings account hovering near zero. My reputation as a sensitive problem solidified, and no job. I got my own tiny apartment downtown, the one Elliot had mocked. I took a job that paid less than half my corporate salary at the Rocky Ridge Legal Aid Center. I stopped being a financial analyst and became a warrior. I took all the rage, all the humiliation, all the injustice I felt, and I channeled it. I fought for tenants being illegally evicted by corporations exactly like Caldwell Meridian. I fought for families being cheated by developers, for workers whose pay was being stolen. I used my inside knowledge of the system to fight the system itself. I became very, very good at my job. Years passed. 1, then 2, then 3. Life settled into a new, harder rhythm. I was broke. I was perpetually tired. But I was doing something that mattered. But Christmas was always hard, every December. As the lights went up and the carols started to play, the memory of that night would come back. The sting of the slap, the sound of the glass breaking, the look of betrayal on my father's face, the hollow, empty feeling of that will reading. It haunted me. It was Christmas Eve. 4 years after Walter's death, I was working late, as usual. Trying to get an emergency stay of eviction filed for a family before the holiday shut everything down. I got home just before midnight. exhausted, tracking snow into my tiny apartment lobby. I checked my mailbox out of habit, junk mail, bills, and one envelope. It was thick, square, cream-colored, with no return address. It was addressed to Phoebe, in a hand I had not seen in 4 years. A strong, slightly slanted, instantly recognizable script. My heart stopped. It was impossible, but I knew that handwriting. It was Walter's. My fingers were numb from the cold, and they fumbled with the thick, expensive paper of the envelope. I tore it open, right there in the sterile, fluorescent light of my apartment lobby. Inside were 2 things. The first was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The second was a much thicker document, several pages, stapled at the corner, legal-sized, and folded into quarters. It was heavy, fibrous paper, the kind lawyers used to use for important documents. I unfolded the single sheet first. It was a handwritten letter, in his unmistakable, strong script. My dearest Phoebe, if you are reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. It means I am gone, and it means the wolves have rewritten my story. Do not believe what you were told. Do not trust what was read aloud in that room full of people who have been waiting for you to be silent. Your father is a good man, but he is a weak one, and he is married to a woman who is not. The enclosed is my real will, my true and final testament. I had Robert Klein draft it, and I signed it 2 years before the Christmas you were struck. I signed it the day I realized Elliot was not just lazy, but cruel, and that my son would not stop him. What they read to you is a lie. This is the truth. I promised you a place in this house. I guaranteed it. Do not let them take it from you. Your mind is your weapon. Use it. Your grandfather, Walter. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely read the last few lines. I dropped my briefcase, the sound echoing in the empty lobby. I unfolded the second document. It was a will. The last will and testament of Walter Caldwell. And the date, printed clearly at the top, was from 2 full years before the Christmas Eve of the slap. It was dated a month after I had presented my plan to save the Aurora complex, the one Elliot had stolen. I scanned the pages, my eyes blurring, the legalese swimming. I didn't need to read it all. I flipped to the section on the disposition of the Caldwell Meridian Group. And the entirety of my controlling shares, representing 51% of all voting stock, I bequeath solely and entirely to my granddaughter, Phoebe Collins. I do this not just out of affection, but out of a deep and abiding respect for her intelligence, her integrity, and her spine. She is the only one who sees this company as I do, not as a vault, but as a foundation. I slid down the wall, sitting heavily on the cold, dirty lobby floor. I was the heir. I had been the heir, all along. That day in the lawyer's office, the $100,000, the pens, that was the fraud. This was the truth. My legal training kicked in, a cold, clear stream cutting through the shock. I got to my feet, grabbed my briefcase, and ran into my apartment. I did not take off my coat. I threw my keys on the counter and powered up my laptop. As a party to the probate, I had been sent a digital copy of the official will, the one that had disinherited me. I had kept it on a secure drive, a digital monument to my own failure. I opened the file. I zoomed in on the signature page. Then I held the handwritten letter Walter had sent me up to the screen, comparing his real signature to the one on the executed document. At first glance, they were identical, the same loops, the same slant. But I had spent 4 years at legal aid staring at forged leases and faked signatures on loan documents. I knew what to look for. On the official will, the W in Walter was slightly hesitant on the upstroke. His real signature was fluid, confident. On the forgery, the T in Caldwell was crossed with a separate, slightly too high stroke. Walter's cross was part of the same continuous motion as the letter. It was a masterful fake, a forgery so good it would take an expert to prove it, or a confession. I sat there, staring at the 2 signatures, the truth and the lie, when my phone buzzed on the counter, a blocked number. It was past midnight on Christmas Eve. No one called me. I picked it up. Hello? Is this Ms. Phoebe Collins? The voice was old, thin, and terrified. It was a man's voice, raspy with what sounded like illness. This is she. Who is this? My name is Harold Mendez. You don't know me. I used to work for Robert Klein. I was his paralegal, his assistant, for 30 years. My blood went cold. Robert Klein, the lawyer who had vanished. Mr. Mendez, I said, my voice low and steady, trying not to spook him. It's very late. How did you get this number? I've had it. For years. I've been holding on to something. I knew this day would come. I can't hold it anymore. He coughed, a terrible, wet, rattling sound that went on for seconds. He was a good man. Mr. Klein, he was a good boss. Until they got to him. Who got to him? Harold? Miss Caldwell. Your father. And her. That woman. After Mr. Walter's stroke. They came in. They had meetings. So many meetings. Mr. Klein was a different person after he started drinking. Where is he? Harold? Where is Robert Klein? He's gone. They paid him. He's gone. But he left something. He was scared. He knew he was doing wrong. And I took something. Before we shredded the old office files. He was weeping now. Quiet. Desperate sobs. I'm sick. Ms. Collins. I'm very sick. I can't meet my maker with this on my soul. Not after what they did to you. And to Mr. Walter's memory. Harold, where are you? I need to meet you. Now. No, not now. Not tonight. Tomorrow. Christmas morning. 7A. The Good Day Diner. On Colfax. The one by the old motel. Come alone. Please. I have to give this to you. He hung up. I did not sleep. I sat in my chair, staring at the handwritten will, the letter, and my laptop screen. The city's sparse Christmas lights blinked in the falling snow outside my window. At 6:15 a.m., I was outside the diner. It was a squat, brightly lit box, smelling of stale coffee and industrial grease. The only car in the parking lot was a 20-year-old rusted sedan. I went inside. He was in a booth in the back, a small, frail man in a thin coat, nursing a cup of coffee. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely lift the mug. His skin was a pale, grayish yellow. I slid into the booth opposite him. Mr. Mendez? He jumped, spilling coffee on the table. Yes, Ms. Collins, you look like your grandfather. What do you have for me, Harold? He did not speak. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, manila envelope, creased and worn. He slid it across the table. I took money, he whispered, staring at the spilled coffee. $10,000. They gave it to me to organize the file room. That's what they called it. Organize. It meant shredding every draft of Mr. Walter's will before the new one. I have a daughter. She was sick. I needed it. But I kept this. I photocopied some pages from Mr. Klein's desk calendar, and this. Inside the envelope was a cheap, plastic USB drive, the kind they gave away at trade shows, and a small stack of photocopied pages, dark and grainy, from a daily planner. What is on this? I asked, holding the drive. It's his insurance policy, Harold said, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were filled with terror and a strange, profound relief. Mr. Klein. He was terrified. He knew they'd turn on him eventually. He made a recording, a few days before he left. I was supposed to wipe his computer. I found it. I copied it. My mind was spinning. A recording. A confession. Harold, why now? Why after 4 years? The doctors, he said, gesturing to his own frail body. Lung cancer, stage 4. I've got maybe 2 months. I can't die a thief. I took their money, but I won't take this secret to my grave. It was that night, that Christmas. Mr. Walter came in 2 days later. I've never seen him so angry, cold. He dictated the final changes to Mr. Klein, the ones in that letter he sent you. He was disinheriting your father, cutting Elliot out completely. He was giving it all to you. But the will they read was dated after that Christmas, I said. Yes, after the stroke. That's when they made their move. They came to Mr. Klein. They said Mr. Walter was confused, incompetent. They said you had manipulated him, taken advantage of his anger from that night. They had their own version of the will, the one that put them back in charge. They said if Mr. Klein didn't sign off, if he didn't probate their version and destroy the real one, they would destroy him. They'd report him to the bar. They implied worse, and then they paid him so much money. Harold's notes confirmed it. I saw the planner entries. Deck 26. Meeting with W. C. Urgent. New draft. Then, months later, meeting with Luke C. and V. C. Estate capacity. Then a frantic, underlined entry. Contact authorities. W. C. Estate tampering. The next week was just a series of single words. Bank. Transfer. Sell house. Flight. He had planned to report it, but they scared him into running. This was it. This was the whole case. This was not a family dispute. This was a conspiracy to commit fraud. This was witness tampering. This was extortion. This was a federal crime. I put the drive and the papers in my briefcase. Thank you, Harold. You have no idea what you've done. I have one more thing to tell you, he said, clutching his coffee cup. The original, the real one, Mr. Walter signed. It's not just the copy he sent you, Mr. Klein. He was supposed to destroy the original, but he couldn't. He was too afraid of what they'd do. But I think he was more afraid of Mr. Walter. Where is it, Harold? The lake house, at Silver Pines. Mr. Walter had a safe installed. He told Mr. Klein to put the original, executed copy in that safe. He made a joke. He said he was hiding it behind the trout. He said it was the one place my father and stepmother would never think to look. A safe at the lake house, the house Elliot now owned. The Christmas slap, I finally understood, was not just an insult, it was the inciting incident. It was the proof Walter needed that his son was too weak to be trusted with his legacy. It was the event that set his entire secret plan in motion. His promise to me wasn't just a comfort, it was a legal strategy. I left Harold in the diner, a small, gray man absolving himself in a pool of fluorescent light. I walked out into the cold, bright Christmas morning. The wound from that night, the one I had carried for years, was no longer just a scar. It was a map. It was evidence. I would no longer be silent. I would not be the sensitive, unstable daughter. I was a lawyer. I was my grandfather's heir, and I was going to take back everything they had stolen. I didn't act immediately. I took the USB drive and the letter from Harold, and I went to see Naomi Briggs. I didn't go to her office. I called her private cell and met her at a bar on the south side of town, a dark place that smelled of beer and sawdust, where no one would ever recognize either of us. I laid it all out, the handwritten will from Walter, Harold's testimony, the planner pages, and the USB drive. Naomi listened, her face impassive, stirring her club soda with a straw. She slid the USB drive into a small, encrypted reader she plugged into her phone. She put in an earbud, listened for 30 seconds, then 60. Her eyes widened, just slightly. She listened for another 2 minutes. She took the earbud out. "That's Robert Klein's voice," she said. It wasn't a question. "It is," I said. "He's confessing to being pressured by your father and stepmother to probate a fraudulent will under duress. He mentions threats to his safety and his career." "Yes." Phoebe, this is the whole ball game. With this and Harold's testimony, I can get a warrant. I can start a federal investigation. But, I said, We don't have the original. Harold says it's in a safe at the lake house, a house that now legally belongs to Elliot. We need to get in. I can't get a warrant for the house based on this alone, she said, tapping the USB. It's a good start, but it's not enough to overcome the fruit of the poisonous tree argument. A defense attorney would say this was stolen by a disgruntled employee. They would fight to have it suppressed. We need more. We need them. So what do? Naomi looked at me, her expression hardening. You're a good lawyer, Phoebe. You know what you do. You let them know you have something. You rattle the cage, and you wait for the snakes to come out. It happened faster than I expected. I didn't even have to do anything. Harold, despite his fear, must have talked to someone else, or perhaps my meeting with him was seen. A week later, a small, unsigned article appeared in a legal gossip blog, questioning the unusually quiet probate of the Caldwell estate and the sudden retirement of Robert Klein. That afternoon, my phone lit up with a text from a number I hadn't seen in 4 years. My father. Phoebe, I am hearing things. We need to talk. As a family. Come to the lake house tonight, 8 p.m., just us. The lake house, Silver Pines, the place Harold had named. The hair on my arms stood up. I called Naomi. They're rattled. He's invited me to the lake house. Tonight? It's a trap, she said immediately. They're going to try to buy you out or shut you up. I know, I said. It's also an opportunity. It's the first time I'll have been in that house since Walter died. It's where Harold said the safe is. There was a long silence on the line. I don't like it, Naomi said. It's isolated. There's no signal up there. You'd be alone with them. I have to go. This is my one chance to either get them to confess or to find that safe. You are not to go looking for any safe, she ordered, her voice sharp. You are there for one reason, to listen. If they offer you a deal, you listen. If they threaten you, you listen, and then you leave. Do you understand me? Your safety is the only priority. How do I prove what they say? You come by my office, now. 30 minutes later, she pressed a small, black object into my hand. It was no bigger than a car key fob. It's a digital audio recorder, high sensitivity, 20-hour battery. Turn it on before you get out of the car. Put it in your pocket. Don't touch it. Just let it run. And Phoebe, if you feel for 1 second that you are in physical danger, you get in your car and you drive away. No piece of evidence is worth your life. I'll have a federal marshal parked at the bottom of the access road, just in case. They won't move unless you call me, but they'll be there. The drive up to Silver Pines was dark. The 2-lane mountain road was slick with fresh snow, and the tall pines crowded in, their branches heavy, blotting out the stars. It was a tunnel of darkness. When I finally turned onto the private, unpaved access road, my headlights cut across the familiar wooden sign. Silver Pines. The house was set back, a massive, rustic cathedral of logs and glass, overlooking the frozen, snow-covered lake. Its windows were blazing with warm, golden light, just like the mansion on Christmas Eve. It looked welcoming. It looked safe. It was the most threatening place on earth. I parked my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached into my pocket, felt the small, hard rectangle, and pressed the on button. A tiny pinprick red light glowed for a second, then went dark. It was active. I got out of the car. The only sound was the crunch of my boots on the snow and the high, thin sound of the wind moving through the pines. I knocked. The door was opened by my father. He looked terrible. His face was gray, and the skin under his eyes was puffy. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked too big for him. Phoebe, thank you for coming. Come in. Come in. I stepped inside. The great room was dominated by a massive stone fireplace, where a fire was roaring. The smell of pine and wood smoke was thick. Elliot was standing by the fire, leaning against the stone mantel, swirling a glass of whiskey. He looked at me over the rim and smirked. And Victoria, she was sitting in one of the deep leather armchairs, a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses on the table beside her. She had arranged a small plate of cheese and crackers. It was a grotesque parody of domestic comfort. She stood as I entered, her face arranged into that familiar mask of loving concern. "Phoebe, darling, we are so glad you came. You've been, well, we've been so worried about you." I did not take off my coat. "What do you want, Luke?" I said, speaking to my father. "Phoebe, please," he said, gesturing to the other armchair. "Sit. Let's just talk, like a family." "We're not a family," I said. "A family doesn't forge wills. A family doesn't steal from their own." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Elliot stopped swirling his drink. Victoria's smile froze. My father visibly deflated. The act was over. "So," he said, his voice dropping, becoming the CEO. "You've been digging. You've been talking to people." "I know what you did," I said. "I know about the real will, the one Walter signed 2 years before he died, the one that left me in charge, and I know about the one you faked, the one you had Robert Klein probate after Walter had his stroke." My father winced, but Victoria just tilted her head, her expression one of clinical, detached interest. "That's a very serious, very public accusation. Phoebe," Luke said, his voice attempting to be firm, "you have no proof." "I have proof, and I have a witness." Elliot took a sudden step forward. "She's bluffing. Dad?" "Sit down, Elliot," Victoria snapped, not taking her eyes off me. Luke sighed. He ran his hands through his silver hair. He looked, for the first time, like an old, beaten man. "Phoebe, what do you want? Is this about money? We can fix that. We always assumed you were unhappy with the disposition." He walked over to a desk in the corner and picked up a document. "This is a proposal, a new trust, in your name, a very generous one. It would provide, well, it would provide more than enough for you to live comfortably, for the rest of your life. All it requires is your signature, a simple agreement to put this to rest, to stop these rumors, to honor your grandfather's memory by letting him rest." "Honor his memory?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "You want me to take a bribe to honor his memory?" "It is not a bribe," my father yelled, his composure finally cracking. "It is a settlement. It is a way for this family to heal." "We cannot heal," I said, "because you are still holding the knife." "Oh, for God's sake," Victoria cut in, her voice bored. She stood up and refilled her wineglass. "Stop being so dramatic. Phoebe, you always loved playing the victim. It's your favorite role." She turned to me, taking a sip of wine. "That night, that Christmas, you've been clinging to that, haven't you? You've built your entire sad little life around that one moment. You have to know. It was a tense evening. We were all stressed. Maybe I was. A little over-exuberant with my touch. But you provoked me. You always did. You loved the attention. You still do." "An over-exuberant touch?" I repeated. The blood was roaring in my ears, but my voice was ice-cold. "You call that a touch?" "It was a mistake, but you're the one who can't let it go. You're obsessed." "You're right," I said. "I am obsessed. I'm obsessed with what you said. I remember every word. I remember you standing over me, smelling like gin and perfume, and I remember you saying I was just like my mother, weak, overly emotional, and completely incapable of handling the world she was born into." Victoria's face went white. I had never, ever repeated those words aloud. "I remember you saying, 'She couldn't take it, and you can't either.'" I took a step toward her. The predator was suddenly the prey. "You stood in my father's house and you desecrated the memory of his first wife, of my mother, in front of 30 people, and he sat there. And he let you." Victoria's composure shattered. The mask of the concerned matriarch melted away, revealing the furious, grasping creature beneath. Her face contorted, the same ugly flush I remembered from that night. "Yes!" she shrieked, the sound echoing off the high wooden beams. "Yes! I said it, and I meant it. You are weak, but you're not stupid. You're a snake. You and that old man, whispering in your study, thinking you were so much smarter than us." She was advancing on me now, jabbing her finger in the air. "I slapped you then so you would finally understand your place, so you would understand what belongs to you, nothing, and what belongs to this family. And that includes the old man's will." There it was, the confession. My hand was in my pocket, my fingers pressed so hard against the recorder I thought my knuckles would break. "Victoria!" my father shouted, a weak, panicked plea. "What about that time Klein almost went to the cops?" Elliot blurted out, his eyes wide with panic. "Dad, you said you handled that. You said he was gone." The room fell into a terrifying, absolute silence. Elliot had just said the one thing he should never have said. He had just connected the fraudulent will to a cover-up, to the disappearance of Robert Klein. Handled, the word hung in the air, cold and heavy as a body. Victoria froze. She slowly turned to look at Elliot, her eyes filled with a murderous contempt. My father just sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. I had it. I had it all. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the copy of Walter's handwritten will, the one he had mailed me, and I threw it on the table, right on top of her cheese plate. "This is the real will," I said, my voice clear and strong. "The one Walter signed, the one that left me in charge, the one you conspired to destroy." Victoria looked at it, her face a mask of hatred. "I know about the forgery," I said. "I know about the stroke. I know about the threats to Robert Klein. And now, thanks to Elliot, I know you handled him when he tried to go to the police. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a federal case." I turned to my father. "Here is your one and only chance. You are going to walk into the U.S. Attorney's office on Monday morning. You are going to confess. You are going to turn over the real will from that safe." I pointed to the wall behind the fireplace, the one Harold had mentioned, the one with the large painting of a trout hanging on it. "And you are going to cooperate, or I will let Naomi Briggs and the entire federal government handle it, and I will burn this family, and this company, to the ground. It's your choice." I turned and walked to the door. "You will not win, Phoebe," Victoria screamed from behind me. "You will not. I will destroy you. I will paint you as an unstable, vindictive bitch all over this city." I opened the door and walked out into the freezing night air. I did not look back. I got to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the recorder. The tiny red light was still blinking. It was still running. I had it. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, my tires spitting snow. As my headlights swung around, they illuminated another car, parked further down the access road, tucked into a grove of aspen trees, its lights off. It was a black sedan, not a police car. As my headlights hit it, its engine roared to life. The lights flashed on, blinding me for a second. Then, just as quickly, the engine and the lights cut out. They weren't leaving. They weren't chasing me. They were just sitting there, in the dark, letting me know they had seen me, letting me know that this was no longer just about the Caldwells, whoever my father and Victoria had used to handle Robert Klein. They were still on the payroll, and they were watching me. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to the 24-hour federal building downtown. My hands shaking so violently, I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands to keep it steady. I kept checking my rearview mirror, my heart a trapped bird against my ribs. The black sedan was gone. It had not followed me down the mountain. But that was almost worse. It wasn't a chase. It was a message. They were watching. They had been watching. I used the after-hours intercom, buzzing Naomi Briggs' emergency line. I must have sounded incoherent. I just kept saying, "I have it. I have them. Silver Pines, I have it all." She met me in a sterile, windowless interview room deep in the building, a place that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic dread. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was still wearing my coat, my pocket heavy with the small, warm recorder. I placed it on the metal table between us, along with the copy of Walter's will and the grainy photocopies from Harold's planner. "Tell me," she said, her voice calm, professional. I told her everything: the setup, the fake cheese plate, the psychological attacks from Victoria, the bribe offered by my father, the exact words Victoria shrieked about the slap and the will, and the final, fatal mistake from Elliot. He said, "You said you handled that." I also told her about the black sedan. Naomi's face, usually so impassive, hardened. She didn't say anything. She just picked up the small recorder, plugged it into a speaker, and pressed play. We sat in that cold, silent room and listened to the entire 90-minute encounter. We heard the false warmth of Victoria's greeting. We heard my father's weak, desperate offer of a trust. We heard my voice, cold and steady, repeating Victoria's words about my mother. And then we heard the explosion. Victoria's voice, no longer smooth and curated, but a raw, animalistic shriek. "Yes, I said it. I slapped you then, so you would finally understand your place, and that includes the old man's will." We heard Elliot's panicked, stupid voice. "Dad, you said you handled that." We heard my final ultimatum and the sound of the door closing. Naomi pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. She looked at the recorder, then at the photocopied will, then at me. "This is no longer a family matter, Ms. Collins," she said, her voice flat and cold as steel. "This is a multi-count federal indictment, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, deprivation of honest services, interstate transportation of stolen property, witness tampering," she tapped the recorder, "and now, thanks to Elliot, obstruction of justice, and thanks to your black sedan, potential witness intimidation." She stood up and began to pace. They didn't just pressure Klein. Handled is not the word you use for a man who took a buyout. Handled is the word you use when you have made a problem permanently disappear. Luke and Victoria didn't just get greedy, they brought in professionals. That sedan was not family. "So what now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Now we act," she said. "Your father, your stepmother, your stepbrother, they are all part of a criminal conspiracy. The recording from Klein was good. The notes from Harold were better. This," she pointed to the recorder on the table, "this is a full confession from every single one of them. This is the key. This gives me probable cause to get into that house." She picked up her phone. "Harold's testimony. We need it. Sworn. On the record. Immediately." "He's sick," I said. "Stage 4. "Then we go to him. Right now." At 4:30 in the morning, a federal prosecutor and I stood in the dim, hospice-lit room where Harold Mendez was sleeping. He woke with a start, terrified. But when he saw me, his expression softened. Naomi was gentle, but firm. She recorded his sworn testimony, every detail. The meetings, the pressure, the shredding, the money, the file he copied, and the safe. He repeated the story about the safe at Silver Pines, hidden behind the painting. At 6:08 a.m., Naomi was in front of a federal magistrate. By 6:30, she had a no-knock warrant to search the Silver Pines property for evidence related to the criminal conspiracy, including specifically, a hidden safe containing the original last will and testament of Walter Caldwell. At 7:08 a.m., I was sitting in the back of an armored black SUV, part of a convoy of 6 identical vehicles, speeding back up the mountain. Dawn was breaking, staining the snow a pale, bruised purple. I was no longer the victim driving away in the dark. I was part of an army, returning in the light. When we turned onto the access road, the house was dark. They were gone. Perhaps they had fled back to the city after our confrontation. The federal team, clad in black, moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They were not there for a conversation. They breached the door, fanning out, clearing the house in less than 2 minutes. "Clear!" I walked in after Naomi. The house was cold. The fire was dead. A pile of gray ash. The wine glasses and the cheese plate were still on the table. A still life of their panic. "The study," I said, pointing. Naomi, 2 agents, and I walked into Walter's old office. The room was paneled in dark, rich wood, And there, on the far wall, was the painting Harold had mentioned, a large, garish oil painting of a leaping trout, a painting Walter had always privately hated, but kept because it was a gift. An agent lifted it carefully off the wall. Behind it, set flush into the wood paneling, was a small, black, digital safe. Well, Mr. Mendez was telling the truth, Naomi breathed. An agent examined the keypad. "We can cut it out of the wall," the agent said. "Wait," I said. My mind was racing. My mind, my spine, a place they would never think to look. What code would he use? Not his birthday, not my father's. He would use the one thing he was trying to protect. "Try my birthday," I said, my voice shaking. "Try 10:08, October 8th. The agent looked at Naomi. She nodded. He punched in the 6 digits, 10, 0, 8. The safe beeped twice, a green light flashed, and with a heavy, satisfying click, the bolts retracted. My breath caught in my throat. I felt the tears, the ones I had refused to cry for 6 years, sting my eyes. He had not just left me his company, he had left me the key. He had chosen me, completely and unequivocally, and locked his final testament behind my own identity. The agent pulled the heavy steel door open. It was not full of money or gold. It was full of documents, and 2 more USB drives. Naomi, now wearing gloves, carefully removed the items one by one. First was a thick vellum envelope, sealed with Walter's personal wax signet. She slid it open. Inside was the original will, handwritten, signed by Walter, and witnessed by Robert Klein and, I was shocked to see, Harold Mendez. It was dated exactly as the copy had been, 2 years before the slap. It was the original. It was the truth. Second was a thin bundle of letters, tied with a ribbon. It was correspondence between Walter and Klein, dated just after Walter's mini-stroke. "Robert," one read, "I am concerned about Luke. Victoria has a profound and unhealthy influence over him. She is systematically alienating him from Phoebe, and I suspect her motives are purely financial. We must ensure the estate is ironclad." Third was a small, black leather notebook. It was Walter's handwriting. It was not a business ledger. It was a journal. I opened it. May 12th, V publicly berated P for her cheap dress at the symphony benefit. Luke said nothing. August 4th, P presented her efficiency analysis. V and Luke reassigned the project to E. This is theft. December 24th, my breath hitched. Christmas Eve. Victoria physically assaulted Phoebe at the dinner table. She slapped her. Luke watched, and then he blamed his daughter. This is the end. The moral rot is complete. He is no longer my son. I had to sit down. He had been watching. He had been documenting it all. He was not just an angry old man. He was building a case. Naomi looked at me, her eyes filled with a lawyer's respect. He was meticulous. Then she picked up the last items, 2 USB drives, identical to the one Harold had given me, but these were labeled in Walter's own hand. One said, "Insurance, Klein." The other said, "Final proof." Naomi plugged Insurance Klein into her laptop. We listened. It was Walter's voice, and Robert Klein's. Walter had been recording his own lawyer. "Robert," Walter's voice rumbled, "I want to be perfectly clear. Phoebe Collins is to be my sole heir regarding the controlling stock. 51%, no one else. I am doing this because she is the only one fit to run it. If Luke, or his wife, contests this after I am gone, I want you to use every legal measure to stop them. Do you understand?" "Yes, Walter," Klein's nervous voice replied. "But if they challenge your capacity?" "They can try," Walter said. "But you and I know I am sane, and this recording will prove it." My grandfather, the old-school patriarch, had been one step ahead of them all. Then Naomi plugged in the last drive. "Final proof." Walter's voice again, but this time he was alone. It sounded like a dictation, recorded just days after the slap. His voice was gravelly, filled with a cold, precise rage I had never heard. "This is my final addendum," he said, as if speaking to a judge. "The incident at Christmas. It was the final proof. I watched my son's wife physically assault my granddaughter at the family table, an act of base, public violence, and I watched my son, Luke, do nothing. He sat down. He chose his wife's violence over his own child's safety. He has lost his moral compass. He has lost his spine. He is not fit to lead." He paused, and I heard him take a deep, ragged breath. As long as that slap goes unanswered, as long as that act is allowed to stand as innocent, as a simple family matter, then this family, my son, does not deserve what I built. This will is the answer. The company is the answer. Phoebe is the answer. This is my final word. The recording ended. Naomi closed the laptop. She gathered the will, the notebook, the letters, and the drives. She looked at me, and for the first time, she almost smiled. "That," she said, "is what we call irrefutable. We have a criminal conspiracy. We have a pattern of abuse. We have the forged document. We have the real document, and we have a full confession from the victim himself, recorded from beyond the grave." We were back in the empty gray interview room at the federal building. The sun was up. The evidence was tagged and locked away. Naomi poured me a cup of anemic vending machine coffee. "They'll be arrested by noon," she said. "Your father, Victoria, and Elliot. We'll get them for fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. We'll find out what really happened to Robert Klein." She sat across from me. "You understand what you've done, right? You're not just getting your inheritance. Phoebe, you're flipping an entire power structure. You're using the law to hold accountable the kind of people who think they can slap someone at a dinner table, steal their future, and still get to be called good people in the society pages. They are about to find out, very publicly, that they are wrong." Naomi was true to her word. By noon, they were arrested. It was not a quiet, dignified surrender. Federal agents intercepted my father's car outside the downtown office. They arrested Elliot as he was ordering a $500 brunch at a hotel. And Victoria, in the most fitting, public humiliation, was taken from the chair of her favorite salon, foil still in her hair. The arrests were the leak, and by 2:00, the war for the narrative began. If I thought the evidence from the safe was a silver bullet, I had severely underestimated Victoria's PR machine. She had been preparing for this. The first wave of attacks was not legal. It was personal. By 3 p.m., the online editions of the local society magazines and gossip blogs were flooded with exclusive insights from sources close to the family. I was not Phoebe Collins, the disinherited granddaughter and whistleblower. I was Phoebe Collins, the troubled daughter. The articles were masterpieces of veiled slander. They painted a portrait of a woman who was deeply sensitive, prone to emotional outbursts, and plagued by long-standing mental instability. They cited my difficult childhood and my inability to connect with her new family. They twisted my grief for my mother into a pathology. They twisted my grandfather's affection for me into my obsession with him. My legal claim was not a fight for justice. It was a tragic cry for help. Then the business press chimed in. The Denver Business Journal ran an editorial that did not even mention my name. Instead, it praised the Caldwell Meridian Group as a pillar of the community, a job creator, and a cornerstone of affordable housing in the metro area. The implication was clear. I was not just attacking a family. I was attacking a Denver institution. I was threatening the jobs and homes of ordinary people. The irony of it, knowing how I had spent the last 4 years fighting for those very tenets against my family's greed, was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. The next day, the video surfaced. It was an anonymous leak, sent to every news outlet in the state. It was cell phone footage, grainy and shot from the end of a long conference table at CMG, dated 3 years prior. It was me, and I was screaming. My face was flushed. I was on my feet, and I was jabbing my finger toward the head of the table. This is not just unethical, It's immoral. My voice, tinny and distorted, shrieked. You are raising rents 20% on families that cannot afford it, all to cover the losses from your vanity projects. It is predatory. It is disgusting. The video cut off right after I slammed my hand on the table. The caption, Inside Phoebe Collins's volatile tenure at CMG. They had cut out the context. They cut out the preceding hour of my calmly presenting spreadsheets showing the rent hike was unnecessary. They cut out Elliot, at the head of the table, laughing and calling the tenants deadbeats. They cut out my father, telling me to calm down and stop being so emotional. They left only my rage, isolated and decontextualized. Presenting it as proof of my instability, I looked unhinged. I looked exactly like the woman they were describing. The blowback was immediate. My phone rang. It was David Miller, the director of the Rocky Ridge Legal Aid Center. He was a good man, but he was a man who answered to a board of directors. Phoebe, he said, and his voice was full of a strained corporate static. I've seen the video. David, it's doctored. They cut the context. I was fighting a rent hike. I was doing my job. I believe you, he said, too quickly. I do, but the board. Phoebe, the optics are just terrible. We are a nonprofit. We survive on our reputation for stability, for being nonpartisan. We can't be seen as being part of a high-profile, volatile family feud. I knew what was coming. What are you saying, David? The board met this morning. They voted. We have to place you on indefinite administrative leave, unpaid, effective immediately. My stomach dropped. Unpaid? David, that's my job. It's my only income. I'm sorry, he said, and he sounded it. It's just, until this blows over, until your name is cleared, we cannot have our senior counsel being the center of a media circus like this. Your personal dispute is creating a conflict of interest with the center's mission. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my small apartment, the gray winter light filtering through the single window. In the span of 48 hours, I had gone from righteous heir to unemployed, toxic pariah. I was alone. My family, my father, had cast me out years ago. Now, my work, the one place I had built a new family, a new identity, had just done the same. They had looked away. They had chosen their own comfort, their own reputation, over me. It was the Christmas dinner all over again. It was the sound of my father sitting back down, the sound of 30 guests suddenly fascinated by their dessert plates. It was the same, suffocating silence. For 2 days, I did not answer the phone. I watched the news. I watched them tear me apart. And then, the tide began to turn, not with a roar, but with a whisper. It started on a small, local housing rights blog. A post appeared. The author was a woman named Maria Sanchez. I knew her name. I had represented her 2 years ago in a pro bono eviction case. The landlord? Caldwell Meridian Group. She wrote, in clear, simple English, I see what they say about Ms. Collins on the TV. They say she is crazy. They say she hates this company. I want to tell you my story. My husband lost his job. CMG tried to evict us. 1 week before Christmas. They said we were deadbeats. Ms. Collins came. She worked all night. She found that they had been overcharging us on utilities for 3 years, a violation of the lease agreement. She stopped the eviction. She got us our money back. She did not seem crazy to me. She seemed like an angel. A few hours later, another post appeared, this time on a community Facebook page. A man named Robert, a veteran I had helped get into a subsidized apartment after CMG had denied his application based on a clerical error. He wrote, that video of her yelling? She was yelling for us. That was the meeting where she was fighting the rent hike. I know, because she told us about it. She was the only one inside that company who ever listened. She's not attacking a pillar of the community. She is the pillar. The hashtag started small. It was not a viral sensation. It was just a few dozen people, then 100. Thank you, Phoebe. The media did not pick it up, but Naomi Briggs did. She called me, her voice energized for the first time. The rats are starting to leave the ship. Phoebe, the public support is giving them courage. A former accountant from CMG just walked into my office. Who? A man named Frank Gallo. Elliot fired him 2 years ago to cut costs. He's been sitting on a hard drive ever since. He's got spreadsheets. Phoebe, secret spreadsheets. They show shell companies. They show money being systematically siphoned from Walter's personal accounts in the 6 months before the official will was read, then routed back through offshore accounts to a private corporation in Delaware, a corporation owned by one person, Victoria. Motive, I whispered. Premeditation. That's not all, Naomi said, her voice tight with excitement. A former executive assistant from your father's floor just signed a sworn affidavit. She saw Robert Klein leaving Luke's office the day before he retired. She said he looked white as a sheet, like he'd seen a ghost, and she remembers, specifically, that he wasn't carrying his normal briefcase. He was carrying a heavy, leather bank envelope, the kind used for large cash withdrawals. It was corroboration. It was Harold's story, confirmed by a second source. And speaking of Harold, Naomi said, we got his video deposition this morning, from the hospice. He's weak, but his testimony is devastating. He confessed to the $10,000 payoff. He said he was afraid, but he also said, and this is a direct quote, I kept a copy of everything because I knew they were pissing on Mr. Botter's grave, and he was the only man who ever treated me with respect. A jury will weep. Naomi used it all. The new witness testimony, the spreadsheets from Frank Gallo, the affidavit from the assistant, the heartbreaking deposition from Harold, and the evidence from the safe. She filed an emergency motion in federal court, arguing that the defendants, Luke, Victoria, and Elliot, were an extreme flight risk and were actively dissipating the very assets that were the subject of the criminal investigation. The judge agreed. He signed an order, an immediate, temporary freeze on all personal and corporate assets of the Caldwell Meridian Group. The empire was frozen solid. This was the move that finally brought my father out of his lawyer-protected silence. He could not stand his company being paralyzed. He did what he always did. He tried to control the narrative. He went on television, not a business channel, but a local, primetime news interview with the city's most sympathetic anchor. The set was soft, the lighting warm. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie. He looked like what he was, a wealthy, powerful man, humbled. He looked, as Victoria had no doubt coached him, like a heartbroken father. Martha, he said, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed sorrow. This is not about money. This is a family tragedy. My daughter, Phoebe. She is a wonderful, brilliant woman, but she has struggled, deeply. He brought up the Christmas, his version. It was a terrible, heated moment, he said, looking directly into the camera, his eyes glistening. A family argument that got out of hand. Words were said that shouldn't have been. A gesture. A gesture was made that we all regret. A gesture? He called her slap a gesture. But my daughter, she was never able to move past that moment. She has held on to that anger, and now she is turning that private pain into this terrible public spectacle, right here, at the holidays. It's a profound misunderstanding, and it is breaking my heart. I just want my daughter back. He cried. Real tears. He was probably even crying for the right reason. Not because he missed me, but because he had just seen the entire world he had built evaporate. The city was split. Half the comments online called him a monster. The other half called me a vindictive, ungrateful, mentally ill bitch who was tearing her family apart for money right before Christmas. I had to go to the courthouse for the first preliminary hearing on the asset freeze. It was my first time in public since I'd been put on leave. The media mob was worse than before. They swarmed me, shouting my father's and Victoria's talking points. Are you mentally unstable, Phoebe? Are you doing this for money? Why are you destroying your family over a slap that happened years ago? I kept my head down. I said nothing. I just walked, pushing through the wall of bodies, feeling as alone as I had ever felt. I sat through the hearing, listening to our lawyers and their lawyers argue over motions. I felt numb. After, I was walking down the long, cold marble hallway, heading for the exit, preparing for the next wave of cameras. Miss Collins? I stopped. 3 young people were standing there, nervously clutching law school textbooks. They looked to be in their early 20s. A young woman stepped forward. She looked terrified, but determined. Ms. Collins, we're first-year law students at DU. We've been following your case. Oh, I said, bracing for an insult. No, not the stuff on the news, she said, blushing. We're nerds. We read the actual court filing, the emergency motion, the one that was unsealed this morning. I stopped. They had read the filing. We read the affidavit from Mr. Gallo, a young man beside her said, his voice earnest. We read the transcript from your grandfather's journal, the part about the dinner. We saw the spreadsheets showing the shell companies. The young woman looked at me, her eyes clear and direct. We just wanted to say, we believe you, what you're doing, standing up to them, using the evidence. It's incredible. It's why we wanted to go to law school. I just stood there. I looked at their faces. They were not society figures. They were not bankers. They were not my family. They were just people who had bothered to read the facts. I could not speak. My throat was too thick. I just nodded. Once, a small, tight acknowledgement. I turned and walked away, but something felt different. The hallway did not seem as cold. My shoulders, which had been hunched against the attacks, felt a little straighter. It was not just me, Naomi, and the ghosts of Walter and Harold anymore. The war was not over, but for the first time, on the battlefield of honor, I was no longer fighting alone. The trial began on the 1st of December. The federal courthouse was a fortress. The press, denied entry to the courtroom itself, camped out on the steps, their satellite trucks forming a perimeter. They had a name for it. The newspapers called it the Caldwell Christmas Trial. It was a circus. Inside, the air was thick, still, and cold. Every seat was taken. I sat beside Naomi, my hands clasped on the table. Across the aisle, my father, Victoria, and Elliot sat with their legal team. They were headed by Gregory Hale, a man whose reputation was built on tearing victims apart on the stand. He was famous, expensive, and he had the morals of a shark. He began his opening statement. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice smooth and reasonable. "This is not a case about fraud. This is a case about failure. It is about the tragic, decades-long failure of a young woman." He gestured to me, his face a mask of pity. "To accept her place in the world. It is about a failure to succeed, a failure to connect, a failure to accept the loving, outstretched hand of her family." He painted me as the failed child, the bitter spinster, the jealous, unstable sister who, in a fit of pique, decided to burn down the family legacy when she did not get what she thought she was owed. He described Walter as a titan, Luke as the dutiful son, and Victoria as the loving matriarch who had tried, for years, to manage my difficult episodes. "This entire case," he boomed, "is a fantasy, cooked up in the mind of a disgruntled daughter who is pathologically jealous of her successful, contributing brother." His first witnesses were a parade of Victoria's socialite friends and a few CMG board members loyal to my father. They all told the same story, that Phoebe Collins was excitable, that she was overly sensitive, that she was prone to making scenes and misinterpreting small things. Then Gregory Hale moved to the centerpiece of his defense, the Christmas dinner. He did not deny the slap. He minimized it. He reframed it. He called it the incident at the table. It was a moment of high tension. One of Victoria's friends, a woman with a face pulled tight from surgery, testified. We were all stressed. Phoebe, she just jumped up. She was screaming about her mother. Victoria, bless her, was just trying to calm her down. She reached out. It was a stop gesture, a calm down gesture. Phoebe turned right into her hand. It was an accident, a terrible, unfortunate accident. And what did Ms. Collins do? Hale asked. She stormed out. She was hysterical. We all just thought, well, that it was another one of Phoebe's psychological issues. They were painting me as the lunatic. They were turning Victoria's assault into my hysteria, my provocation, my instability. They were trying to poison the jury, to make them believe that any evidence I brought was just the fruit of a diseased and vindictive mind. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I swore the oath. Naomi stood. Ms. Collins, I want to take you back to the night of December 24th, 6 years ago. Can you please tell the jury, in your own words, what happened at the dinner table? I looked at the jury, 12 ordinary faces, looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I told them everything. I did not yell. I did not cry. I reported the facts. As if I were a police officer describing a crime scene, I described the project I had saved. I described Victoria's words, attributing my work to Elliot. I repeated my polite correction. I repeated Elliot's words, calling my apartment sad and me uptight. I described the spilled sauce. I described Victoria's advance, and I repeated the words she had said, the ones that had made me stand up. I remember, I said, my voice clear and steady. She leaned in and told me I was, just like my mother, weak, overly emotional, and completely incapable of handling the world she was born into. I could see my father flinch across the room. And what happened then, Ms. Collins? I stood up. I told her to never speak about my mother. She shoved me, and then she slapped me across the face. What did your father, Luke Caldwell, do? He stood up, I said. He looked at me. He looked at her, and then he sat back down. He said, "Don't make a scene. It was her fault." And your grandfather, Walter Caldwell, what did he do? He set his silverware down. He looked at my father. Then he stood up. He tapped his glass. He said, "The party is over. Tonight, my son has shown me exactly who is truly worthy of the Caldwell name." And then he left the room. The courtroom was utterly silent. I had not given them emotion. I had given them a sequence of events, a choice, a betrayal, a judgment. Now it was Hale's turn. He approached the stand, smiling, as if I were a favorite niece he was about to tease. "Ms. Collins, that's a very dramatic story," he said. "You've had a long time to rehearse it, haven't you?" "It's not a story, it's my memory." "Your memory? Let's talk about that. You were distraught, were you not? Hysterical, as one witness put it." "I was assaulted." "You claim you were assaulted. Others say it was an accident. Tell me, Ms. Collins, do you hate your stepmother, Victoria?" It was a trap. If I said yes, I was vindictive. If I said no, I was a liar. I looked at him. I don't believe anyone should be slapped at a dinner table while their family watches. Not me, not her, not anyone. He scowled, his first loss of composure. He tried another tack. "You were jealous of your stepbrother, weren't you? He was the heir. You were in the analysis department." "I was the one who saved the 5 Points project," I said. "Elliot was the one who got the credit." "So you were jealous. You were angry enough to concoct this elaborate fantasy, this conspiracy, all to get the money you thought you deserved." "I am here," I said, leaning forward slightly, "to execute my grandfather's real will, the one he wrote because he knew the truth." "Objection!" Hale shouted. "Speculation." "Sustained," the judge said. "The witness will stick to the facts." Hale had no more questions. He had not laid a glove on me. I stepped down. Then, Naomi began to build her case, brick by brick. She tore Gregory Hale's narrative to the ground. She called Frank Gallo, the accountant, who calmly presented the spreadsheets showing the illegal transfer of Walter's assets to Victoria's shell company. It was a systematic draining, Gallo testified, starting 2 days after Mr. Walter's stroke. She called the executive assistant, who testified under oath that she saw Robert Klein leave Luke's office with a cash envelope, looking absolutely terrified. And then she brought Christmas back to the courtroom. The prosecution would like to play an audio recording, Naomi announced, obtained legally via a warrant from the residence at Silver Pines. The judge nodded, the speakers hissed to life, and we heard it all again, this time, not in a small, windowless room, but in a vast, packed courtroom. We heard Victoria's voice, not the polished, concerned matriarch, but the raw, screaming creature. "Yes, I said it. I slapped you then so you would finally understand your place, and that includes the old man's will." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I saw a juror, a middle-aged woman, put her hand over her mouth. Victoria had gone chalk white. Then, the second voice, Elliot's, high and panicked. "Dad, you said you handled that. You said he was gone." Hale was on his feet. "Objection! Objection! This is inadmissible. It was a private conversation. It was a family argument." "It was a confession, Mr. Hale," the judge said, his voice cold. "Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Briggs." Naomi proceeded. She projected the photos of the safe onto the screens, the painting of the trout, the keypad. She showed them the contents. She read from Walter's journal. December 24th, Christmas Eve. Victoria physically assaulted Phoebe. Luke watched. He has lost his moral compass. The words echoed in the silent room. Gregory Hale's defense was in ruins. The family misunderstanding was now a documented, premeditated conspiracy. But the final, devastating blow was yet to come. Naomi called for Harold Mendez's video deposition to be played. The screen lit up with his face, frail and gray in the hospice bed. He was weak, but his voice was clear. He confessed to the payoff. He described the shredding. He described the fear. He identified the real will, the one from the safe, as the one Walter had signed. "I was his witness," Harold whispered. He deserved better. Then, Naomi played the audio file from the Klein USB, Robert Klein's own voice, confessing to the duress, the threats, the forgery. It was over. The jury looked sick. Gregory Hale, desperate, stood up for his redirect. He had one card left to play. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a tragedy. But look at the evidence. A man, an old man, a man who had just had a stroke, suddenly decides to disinherit his entire family for what? A dinner table argument? A gesture?" He dripped scorn. "Isn't it more likely that this will from the safe, these journals, these recordings, are the product of a man who was, tragically, no longer in his right mind? Isn't it possible that Walter Caldwell was senile, confused, and being manipulated by a granddaughter who saw her chance? He was trying to paint Walter as the lunatic now, not me." Naomi stood. "The prosecution appreciates Mr. Hale's concern for Mr. Caldwell's mental state. In fact, we share it, which is why the prosecution calls its final witness, Dr. Aris Mehta." A small, neat man in a dark suit walked to the stand. "Dr. Mehta," Naomi said, "what is your profession?" "I am the chief of neuro-oncology at Denver General. I was also Walter Caldwell's primary neurologist for the last 5 years of his life." Hale went rigid. This was a witness not on his list. This was a surprise. "Dr. Mehta," Naomi continued, "you treated Mr. Caldwell after his transient ischemic attack, did you not?" "I did. We ran a full cognitive battery, CT, fMRI, and a 2-day neuropsychological evaluation." "And what were your findings? In the weeks and months after the attack?" Dr. Mehta put on his glasses and looked at the jury. "Mr. Walter Caldwell was one of the sharpest men I have ever had as a patient. His TIA had zero lingering cognitive effects. He was perfectly, completely, and, I would say, exceptionally lucid until the day he died. His mind was a steel trap. So he was not confused? Naomi asked. No. He was not senile? Absolutely not. He was in full command of all his faculties. Naomi turned to Hale. Your witness. Hale just waved his hand, defeated. No questions. The pressure in the room was unbearable. All eyes were on the defense table. Victoria was staring, immobile, at the wall. My father looked like a dead man, his head in his hands. And then Elliot, who had been vibrating with a mixture of terror and rage, finally, predictably, snapped. He jumped to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. No! He screamed, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent's. It's not fair. He was my grandfather. That company was mine. It was supposed to be mine. She tricked him. She's a... Order, the judge roared, slamming his gavel. Order, Mr. Caldwell. You will be silent or you will be held in contempt. Two marshals grabbed a struggling, weeping Elliot and forced him back into his chair. But it was too late. The jury had seen it. The entire courtroom had seen it. The petulant, grasping, unhinged motive, confessed in a fit of rage. Gregory Hale just slowly, elegantly, sat down and packed his briefcase. The judge looked at the jury, then at the clock. The court will recess. We will hear closing arguments in the morning, after which I will release you for deliberation. He banged his gavel. We are adjourned. I stood up, my legs weak. Naomi put a hand on my arm to steady me. It's done, she whispered. I walked out of the courtroom, past the defense table. I did not look at them. I walked into the great hall, which was now dark. The late afternoon sun had vanished. I looked out the massive windows. It had started to snow, thick, heavy, silent flakes, illuminated by the streetlights, drifting down onto the city. It was a white, cold, suffocating blanket, exactly like the one that had fallen 6 years ago. The circle was complete. The past was no longer a memory. It was here, and it was waiting for a verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The summons to return to the courtroom came just as the sky was turning a deep, bruised purple. It was 4 o'clock on Christmas Eve. The scheduling, a strange, bureaucratic coincidence, felt like a deliberate, almost cosmic piece of theater. We were going to end this on the same day it began. The courtroom was packed, hotter and more pressurized than it had been at any point during the trial. Every seat in the gallery was full. In the hallway, I saw a small, forlorn-looking Christmas tree, decorated with cheap tinsel, placed by the security checkpoint. The sight of it was so bitterly ironic, a festive prop for a family's public execution. We all rose. The judge entered, his face grim, unreadable. The jury filed in. They did not look at the defense table. They did not look at us. They looked straight at the judge. My heart was not hammering. It was perfectly, terrifyingly still. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. The foreman, a middle-aged woman, stood and said, her voice clear. The verdict was read. A series of findings on the civil counts, on the matter of the fraudulent will. We find for the plaintiff, on the matter of the conspiracy to defraud. We find for the plaintiff, on the matter of the conversion of assets. We find for the plaintiff. With every plaintiff, another brick of the Caldwell empire crumbled. The judge then read his own ruling, the one that would execute the jury's findings. He was not just a referee, he was a surgeon, and he was about to make his incision. Based on the irrefutable evidence presented to this court, he began, his voice a cold, flat instrument of the law. It is the finding of this court that the document probated as the last will of Walter Caldwell is null and void. It is the product of a deliberate, malicious, and criminal conspiracy of fraud, undue influence, and coercion. He looked directly at Gregory Hale, who was staring at his empty legal pad. It is the further finding of this court that the handwritten will, recovered from the safe at the Silver Pines residence and verified by forensic analysis and witness testimony, is the true, legal, and binding last will and testament of Walter Caldwell. I closed my eyes. Just for a second. I guarantee it. He had. The judge continued, outlining the decision. Therefore, this court orders the immediate and full transfer of all assets as stipulated in the true will. The controlling shares of the Caldwell Meridian Group, representing 51% of all voting stock, are to be transferred to the plaintiff, Ms. Phoebe Collins, effective immediately. He went on, naming the real estate, the investment accounts, the personal property. It was all mine. With the stroke of a pen, I had gone from an unemployed legal aid attorney to one of the most powerful property owners in the state. However, the judge said, his voice dropping, this is not merely a civil matter. He looked, for the first time, directly at the defense table, at my father, at Victoria, at Elliot. The evidence of criminal wrongdoing is overwhelming. This court is therefore seizing a significant portion of the defendant's personal assets, pending a full federal and state criminal investigation. He recommended, from the bench, that the U.S. Attorney and the State Attorney General pursue immediate indictments against Luke Caldwell, Victoria Caldwell, and Elliot Caldwell on multiple charges, including conspiracy, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. He was not just giving me the company, he was feeding them to the wolves. I did not feel a rush of triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt a deep, profound, and hollow ache. I thought of Walter in his study, his voice on that last recording, filled with a cold rage. He had not wanted this. He had not wanted to destroy his son. He had just wanted his legacy to be in the hands of someone who would not tarnish it. He had created a weapon to protect his company, and I had just been forced to fire it. At the defense table, Victoria sat as if she had been turned to stone. Her posture was still perfect, her hands still clasped in her lap. She was staring at the judge, her face a blank, white mask. My father had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking and silent, racking sobs. Elliot was just gone. His eyes were vacant, staring, a spoiled child who had just learned, for the first time, that the world could say no. The judge slammed his gavel. This court is adjourned. The room exploded in a chaos of sound, chairs scraping, reporters yelling from the gallery, marshals shouting for order. And over it all, one sound, high and piercing. No! Victoria was on her feet. Her blank mask had shattered, replaced by a face of such pure, undiluted hatred it was barely human. She was not looking at the judge. She was not looking at me. She was staring at my father. You promised, she shrieked, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. You promised me. You said she was nothing. You said she had no proof. You said you handled it. You promised this would never happen. It was the last nail, a full, public confession of her complicity, screamed in a federal courtroom. Gregory Hale just put his face in his hands. My father looked up at her, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a 10-year-old boy. He looked, for the first time in his life, utterly, pathetically helpless. He had lost his wife, he had lost his son, and he had just lost his father's entire empire. He had no control left. Naomi put a hand on my back. Let's go. Phoebe, it's over. We moved toward the side exit, but the crowd was too thick. We were funneled into the center aisle, directly toward them. We had to pass their table to get out. As we approached, Victoria saw me. Her face, which had been contorted in rage at my father, snapped its focus. Her eyes narrowed. It was as if all the rage in the room, all the humiliation, all the loss, focused into a single, burning point. She moved. She was so fast, I did not even have time to flinch. She lunged from behind her table, pushing past her own lawyer, her arm raised, her hand open, her fingers spread, her rings catching the light. It was the same arm, the same hand, the same gesture. It was an animal reflex, a creature resorting to the one tool it had ever known: violence. She was going to slap me, again, in front of everyone. She never made it. A large uniformed court security officer, seeing the move, stepped between us. He did not grab her. He did not touch her. He simply put his arm up, a solid bar, blocking her path. Victoria's hand, moving with full force, struck the officer's raised forearm with a dull, wet thud. And there it hung, her arm, frozen in the air, stopped, impotent. Her assault, which had defined my life for 6 years, had just been rendered completely powerless by a man in a uniform who was just doing his job. She stood there, trembling, her hands still raised, her chest heaving. I stopped. I did not back away. I stood less than 2 feet from her, and I looked her directly in the eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. "That Christmas Eve," I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the noise of the room. "You slapped me because you believed no one would ever stand up for me. You believed my father would protect you, and he did." I nodded at the officer, who was still holding his position. "Today," I said, "the law stood up for me, so I don't have to slap you back." I looked past her. My father was watching, his face a ruin of shame. He saw me look at him, and for the first time, he was the one who could not hold my gaze. He turned his head away, staring at the empty witness box. A man finally forced to confront the truth of his own cowardice. It was his final, silent abdication, and I felt, in that moment, the crushing weight of his failure lift from my shoulders. It was not my burden to carry anymore. It was his. I turned, and Naomi and I pushed our way through the doors into the great hall. The press was a wall of sound and light. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in my face. "Phoebe, how does it feel? How does it feel to take it all? Do you have a comment for your father? What will you do with the company?" Naomi stepped in front of me. "Ms. Collins has no comment at this." "Wait," I said. I held up a hand. The yelling stopped. I looked at the cameras. I looked at the reporters, their faces hungry, desperate for a soundbite. "I have one thing to say," I said. "Not everyone who gets slapped at a dinner table has a grandfather who leaves them a secret will in a safe. Not everyone has proof. If you are not being believed, if your family is telling you that you are unstable, that you are too sensitive, that you are lying, record it, write it down, and find someone outside the family to listen to you. Find your Naomi Briggs. Thank you." I did not wait for another question. We pushed through the last of them and out the massive bronze doors, onto the courthouse steps. The cold hit me. It was dark, and it was snowing, thick. Gentle flakes were drifting down, illuminated by the streetlights, coating the city in a clean, white, silent blanket. The sound of the city was muffled, distant. I stood there for a moment, just breathing the cold, clean air. I felt empty, not sad, not happy, just finished. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up. 5 p.m., Christmas Eve. I had 2 calls to make. My first call was to the hospice. The night nurse answered. "Harold Mendez's room. Please, it's Phoebe Collins." She put me through. His voice was a thin, dry whisper. "Ms. Collins?" "We won. Harold," I said, my voice thick. "We won. They read the will, the real one, the judge. He believed us. He believed you. Your testimony. It changed everything. Thank you." I heard a long, ragged sigh on the other end of the line. Then, for a moment, I just heard the sound of quiet, relieved weeping. "He was a good man," Harold whispered. "Mr. Walter, he was a good man." "You are a good man, Harold," I said. "You're a hero. Rest easy now." I hung up. My second call was to my old office. David Miller, the director of Rocky Ridge, picked up, his voice startled. "Phoebe?" "David," I said. Well, I'm going to be in a position to make some changes. I want to set up a new fund, a very large one. I want to call it the Walter Caldwell Foundation for Fiduciary Justice. I want it to provide pro bono legal representation for victims of corporate and familial abuse, people who are being ripped off by their own families, their own bosses, and have no one to fight for them. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Phoebe, my God, yes, of course, we can start the paperwork. Good, I said. I'll be in after the holiday to discuss the transfer. I'm afraid I won't be coming back to my old job, but I will be your largest donor. I hung up before he could answer. I stood there on the steps, the snow collecting on my shoulders. I was the sole owner of the Caldwell Meridian Group. I had a company to run. I had a board to fire. I had buildings to fix and tenants to protect. I had a new foundation to build. I looked back at the imposing neoclassical facade of the courthouse, its stone columns disappearing into the snowy darkness. I thought of my grandfather, standing up from that dinner table, tall and righteous, his silence a terrible judgment. He had made his stand. And now, here I was, standing alone on the steps in the snow, the new head of the Caldwell Empire. I was no longer the beaten daughter. I was no longer the sensitive ghost. I was the one who had forced them all to face the truth. I was the one who was left standing. That Christmas Eve, years ago, they laughed when my stepmother slapped me. This Christmas Eve, no one was laughing. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm so grateful to share it with you. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. So drop a comment below and let's all connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and if my story resonated with you, please support it by hitting that hype button so more people can hear it.